pray for calm for me. This is not my thing. We're just so thankful we had the opportunity to go to Israel this winter. We left February 25th. It was 5 below zero here and snow-packed roads and icy, and we wondered about getting to the airport, but left on Monday the 25th, and we got to Newark, and then from there flew through the night and arrived in Tel Aviv the next day, late afternoon, and then took a bus from there to Jerusalem. It's about 8 hours difference time-wise. And we were fortunate. We went with a group from the Midwest Conference, and Pastor Matt Norland and Pastor Dan Olson organized the trip, and they've gone every 2 years for a while now. But they do a really good job in organizing and planning, and we were just thankful to be able to go with them. Most of the people, the majority were from Nebraska, some were from Kansas, some from Colorado. There was one couple from Chicago and one man from Rhode Island, a church that Matt had been in when he was out in Rhode Island. So great group of people. There were 44 of us all together. When we got to Tel Aviv, we came out of the airport, and that was the first thing I saw. And when coming from 5 below zero, that was a welcome sight. So the first 2 nights we stayed in a hotel in the Old City. It was called Knights Palace, and it was built in the 1500s. And we were there the first 2 nights and the last 3 nights that we were. This is our group of 44 as we're heading out on Wednesday morning with our rain gear on. It was cool and rainy the first 5 days anyway that we were there. So none of us had quite enough clothes along. This is part of the excavation of the city of David, and this is fairly new excavation just outside the old city there. And then we went down into, down towards Hezekiah's Tunnel, and Rod will tell you a little bit about Hezekiah's Tunnel.
Yeah, the last time we went there, it was 4 years ago, and we got to go through the wet part, which was a tunnel that during King Hezekiah's reign, they needed a source for water, so they dug with hand chisels a quarter of a mile from one side of the mountain to the other, and they met in the middle, which is kind of amazing, and the water also kept about ankle deep all the way through. I mean, it was just about perfectly done, and you could walk through it. You had to maybe hunch over a little bit, but we sang as we went through. When it was this is 4 years ago we went through, and we went through the dry tunnel, which is
it's called the Canaanite Tunnel, which is nearby, and that's a dry tunnel. They thought because of the cool temperatures this time that we wouldn't want to be wet for the rest of the day, so we walked through the Canaanite Tunnel, which isn't quite as long, but got the feeling of it anyway. And then this is just a hillside in Jerusalem. Lots of hills, steep hills, and
that was mainly the Palestinian area right there, and you can always tell the Palestinian area. They have a water, like a hot water heater, what it looks like on top of the roof, because their water is shut off every maybe 2 or 3 times a week that they get water, and the Israelis just put that kind of pressure on them where they don't allow them to have that convenience.
Yeah, that's just a street outside of the tunnel, and a lot of the streets are stone, and they're very slippery when they were wet, and most of the time it seemed like it was wet when we were walking, so you really had to watch your step. Then there's just a small area. This is the Pool of Siloam, and I'm going to read from John 9. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," said Jesus, "but this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. As long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." Having said this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told him, "wash in the Pool of Siloam." This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing.
I might just say that so often that was the thing that kept striking, I think, all of us, was the reality of the Word, that you're actually there where those things happen. And a lot of it had been excavated too, like the Roman roads and a number of the things that we saw. It just, when you read the Word now, those pictures, they come back again, and it isn't quite the same as it was before. It just, the reality of the Scriptures.
There are 7 gates going into the old city, and this one is Zion Gate. And I don't know if you can see it, but there's pock marks around the gate. And this was from conflict between Jordan and Israel.
1967 war is when that was inflicted.
This was an excavation of a wealthier home within the old city. And they said they could tell it was wealthier people because of the size of the rooms, and also there was a bath area, and just the size of the house in general, and the mosaics on the floor. And
yeah, the mosaics are still in terrific condition, all these 2,000 years, and it's still real striking how well preserved.
This was a road from the Roman Byzantine era that was also within the old city. And this is the famous Wailing Wall, or the Western Wall, where Jewish people will go and pray. This is the men's side. There's a division. There's a women's side and a men's side. They don't pray together. And they go there any time of the day or night and pray, and a lot of them will stick their petitions in the cracks in the wall.
Yeah, and if you aren't familiar with that, the Wailing Wall is part of the foundation that goes all the way around Mount Moriah, or where the temple was built on. And right now the Golden Dome, or the Muslims, control that, but this is the area that the Jews, the closest they can get to the temple is the Western Wailing Wall, and that's why it's such a special site for them.
Mm-hmm. And it's important for them to be clean before they go and pray. So this is a little washing area. Notice the 2-handled cups. They pour over one hand and then grab the handle with that, so that they don't contaminate the one they've just washed. So I just thought that was sort of interesting. This is a tunnel. It's called the Rabbinic Tunnels. It's under that Western Wall, or by the foundation. And you want to tell
well,
about
I was just
them?
going to say that this goes all the way again around Mount Moriah. In some places it's 40, 50 feet high. And these stones that I'm standing next to, the one, I'm not sure if this is the same one, but it was 41 feet long. It was 11 feet high and 10 feet deep. It weighed 560 ton, which was like 19 semi-loads that would be equal. And yet there's no mortar in there. It's perfectly cut to where they match, all this 40 to 50 feet up in the air. This was probably the largest stone, but it just, how perfect it is. And they, instead of making it 90 degrees, they also cut it so that it was just a slight angle, so that when you stood next to the wall, you wouldn't be overwhelmed by
You wouldn't feel like it was toppling over on you. But how did they move these huge blocks to get them into place perfectly? It's just amazing.
Yeah.
To see the blocks and how they were. And then further on down the tunnel, it isn't so precise, and this was used as an aqueduct. And then there's cisterns along the way. This is one of the cisterns where they stored their water. This was the pools of Bethesda, and I will read from John 5. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for a feast of the Jews. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the waters are stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes in ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and he walked.
They explained to us, too, that the stirring of the pools was, as they opened up the aqueducts, the water that would come in, that would be the stirring that would come into the pool there, Bethesda.
Yeah, and they believe that, just one person would healed when this happened,
Yeah.
and so whoever was into the pool first was healed. But that was one of the areas where they said they're 100% sure that this was actually the pools of Bethesda. There's certain places they tell you, and they said this may be where this happened, but at the pool of Bethesda, they said they were 100% sure that is what they say it is. So this was St. Anne's Church, which was near the pool, and the acoustics in this chapel were just amazing. Groups would stand here like this group is doing and sing, and so each group would take their turn, and we sang Holy, Holy, Holy in there, and it just sounds so beautiful, the acoustics.
It was the goosebumps.
Here we're out on the shepherd's fields outside of Bethlehem, and can't you just see the shepherds and their sheep out there, and the angel appearing to them and telling them that the Messiah is born. I just love that area. It was really rainy the day we were there, so there was only one of the caves open. There's several caves in that area, but the shepherds would take their sheep into the caves for protection and at night to keep warm. And you can see the black ceilings, and that was from the smoke from the fires.
They said the shepherd would lay across the opening of the cave, and there'd be a number of different shepherd sheep all together, but in the morning when they went out, they would follow that particular shepherd and separate, the flocks as they went out to graze for that day.
The sheep hear my voice, and they follow. So they knew the shepherd's voice. And they said that it could have been a cave similar to that, too, where Jesus was born, because they used caves like that, too, as to keep their animals. There was a chapel in this area also, and so many of the chapels have these beautiful motifs, beautiful paintings, and these were just some in that chapel depicting the shepherd coming to the shepherds, and then also the birth of Jesus. You go ahead and talk about this.
This is the Herodian Palace, which was a mountain that Herod, he's an amazing builder, but he wanted to be able to see Jerusalem from his palace, and this watchtower that's displayed here on this small
It's just a model
depiction,
of it.
a
Yeah.
model. But so what he did is he had the mountain built higher, which is kind of incredible. So he built the mountain higher. It looks just like a lava flow, because it's just perfectly round, and at the top was the watchtower there, and then he had his palace below, one of his palaces, but they had that open, but we had to walk maybe, it was a ways, and the storm that came in was just amazing. The wind came in, and it was...
That was what the sky looked like, so that was why we didn't go
Oh.
out and actually see the excavation. We just got to
Yeah.
see the model.
We had one of our pastors took a picture, a selfie, and he held it up, and it was just like he's on the motorcycle. His cheeks were flopping, and his hat
The
was
wind
going
was
like this.
incredible, and
It was just incredible.
yeah.
So
They-
we chose not to go up and
Yeah.
went back down, but I would love to have seen it,
Yeah.
the palace.
They said Herod was an amazing builder, but he was a terrible person. They said it was better to be an animal of his than to be part of his family. He was very cruel and killed his wife, his children. He
children.
didn't want any competition for anyone else to rule. He was very cruel. This was at the Bethlehem Bible College, and they do amazing work there trying to spread the love of Jesus with the Palestinian people. And we heard a presentation by one of the professors talking about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. We went to the Church of the Nativity, and this is a very commercialized area. It's a huge church built over where they say that Jesus was born. I think we stood in line for an hour and a half to get in for about 2 seconds to see this spot. And there's 3 different churches in charge, and some of it's real gaudy and ornate. And there's conflict between the churches as to who does what jobs and all this.
Which light bulb gets changed and whose responsibility it is, and they even have to have police there, that the conflicts get that. So we were told, there's lots of religion here, but not a lot of faith. There's this competition between churches.
That's the spot where they say that Jesus was born. And this is the manger.
And for a lot of
area.
people making a pilgrimage, it was really an emotional thing for some people, but for us, it just seemed like it was pretty ornate and,
it was easier
commercialized.
to picture him when we were in the caves that he was born there. We talked about Herod being quite the builder, and this is another one of his retreat centers. This is Caesarea by the sea. We went here one day when it was had been raining and the roads were flooded, and so we had a change of plans, and so we went to this by the Mediterranean Sea. This is the racetrack for the chariot races.
Yeah, if you've been to or seen Ben-Hur, it was very much like that, where most of the stands were built right on the curve, where the chariots made their curve and all the crashes took place. But you could see real distinctly, the outline of the Colosseum there and the.
Yeah, this is Caesarea by the sea up here. Jerusalem is down here, so it's quite a ways up there. Bethlehem there. I should have been pointing that out as we were.
As you enter the Colosseum, this is where the bathroom is, in the main gate, and the slaves would sit here and take care of the cleaning, whatever it was. But people were real immodest, as it must have been, to.
That was their outdoor bathroom.
But it was an outdoor bathroom. It looked like it was exposed.
You can see the outline of his swimming pool. The rectangular outline was his swimming pool that was right by the Mediterranean Sea. And you can see part of the mosaics on the floor there. That was some building had been there. There's Pastor Matt, Florence's daughter Clarice, Matt's mom Pam, and then Rod and I by the sea. This was the town of Zipporah. There isn't a town there anymore, but they have done quite a bit of excavation. And it was just amazing, the mosaics. The first picture, that was a sidewalk, and it's all these little tiny stones like this that have been made into this beautiful mosaic, and that's their sidewalk.
And the shops would have been along the side, and this was kind of the main intersection. And all the street was, was stone laid, and it was completely exposed now. And if you stood in the center and looked down the street, you could see the impression of the carts, the tracks of the carts as they got down. And it's only maybe 2 or 3 inches wide, but it was almost an inch deep where the traffic had been on this stone road. And they even had a couple of stones where they had marked where the people had been playing games. They had a certain kind of game that they would etch into the stone. And those were still, exposed after they'd been excavated. But it was just brought you back to 2,000 years.
Yeah, that was part of the Roman road there. And they said Zipporah was fairly close to Nazareth, and that perhaps Jesus would have even gone there to help with building. That's the Wailing Wall again. This is, we can go on to the next one. Capernaum is on the Sea of Galilee. Sea of Galilee is way up here, and Capernaum was just an amazing place. They've done a lot of excavating there, and this you can see the outlines of homes, the foundations of homes, and it just went on and on. I mean, it was a really big area that they had excavated. There's Clarice by the statue of St. Peter. Peter's home was there. Why don't you talk about that?
Well, Jesus spent so much time in Capernaum. That was his main point of ministry. But you can see the foundations of the homes there. They use the lava rock that's in the area there. And as a family would grow, they would just add another room on, and it seemed like all of them were almost connected from one to another, like the whole village was connected. But the Catholic Church has built this church over Peter's church, or Peter's home, and it's I think it's only 4 columns that it rests on, and then the whole floor of the church is glass. So when you walk in, you can look down and see where the disciples and where Peter's home was. It was one of the largest ones, and that's where they would meet. And it was just the foundation, that was there. Now the walls were, like, as you can see here, just a few feet high. But again, right in Capernaum there.
The synagogue, what's remaining there is the white stone that is built on top of the black stone. And the black stone is from Jesus' time, and the white stone is from the 4th century. And there you can sort of see the black stone foundation. That would have been from Jesus' time, and then the white blocks above that were built in the 4th century. But that was the synagogue in Capernaum where they met. There we are with Pastor Matt in the synagogue.
And Jesus spent a lot of time preaching and teaching in the synagogue there in Capernaum.
When you read Scripture, you hear of Capernaum a lot. But it was a really neat area. The steps going up to the synagogue are uneven, and they said one of the reasons for that was that you had to look down to see where you were walking, and that you would approach in a humble position, looking down. This was a chapel that was on the Mount of the Beatitudes. It's a hillside along the Sea of Galilee where Jesus would have preached told about the Beatitudes.
Just a beautiful area, and you would think, around such a beautiful lake that things would have been built up over the years, but it really isn't that way. There's lots of open space yet, and you can just picture the hillside, Jesus preaching on the hillsides of around the Sea of Galilee.
They had each of the Beatitudes on these stone blocks. That was an ancient boat that was dug up from the mud and has been preserved. And they said it could have been like a boat that the disciples would have used for fishing. We went out on the Sea of Galilee one day in a boat similar to this one. That would have been different from what Jesus would have used, but you can see how the weather wasn't real great. From our boat, we saw the city of Tiberias, and then we had lunch there. You could have a whole fish, including head and tail, or you could have a fillet or chicken. There we are by the Sea of Galilee. And this is the shore where, after Jesus' resurrection, the disciples are out fishing, and Jesus is on shore, and they haven't been able to catch anything all night. And he asked them to throw down their nets again, and they catch a bunch of fish, and they come ashore, and he has prepared fish for them on this seashore. And I'll just read a few verses from here. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." So this is the chapel there. It's called the Church of the Primacy of St. Peter, and this is the area where they think Jesus asked Peter this. And the steps, you might want to say something about the steps.
Oh, the steps, they're probably 15, 20 feet above the water line now, but it was the steps that Jesus and the disciples would probably use to get in the boat when they lived in Capernaum. It's right on the shore there where they left, and the steps are just carved out of the stone, that lava stone that's there.
They're on the side of this chapel.
Yeah.
It isn't from Capernaum, but it's from this area. But they said those steps are probably back from that time. This was the Jordan River baptismal site. This is not very far from where the Jordan comes off of the Sea of Galilee, so the water is pretty clear here. And there was a group. You want to read that, Rod?
Oh, in those days, Jesus came from Nazareth to Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. And when he came up out of the water, immediately he saw the heavens open and the Spirit descending upon him like a dove. And a voice came from heaven, "Thou art my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." Now, when we were there, there was a number of groups being baptized, but we just went down to the water, and each of us took some of the water, and the person next to us, we placed a cross above their on their forehead and asked them to remember their baptismal vows.
It was very, very meaningful time.
Oh, yeah.
This was at
Sunday morning,
that site there, and that's Pastor John Madvig. He's from Omaha. I think he's Cindy's pastor, actually. Cindy Johnson's pastor. And we had a little service there, and then, yeah, we remembered our own baptism.
Is that you, Bay?
No.
Keep your head up.
This is ruins from the city of Dan, which is way up at the top of Israel. There's no city there, but there was quite a bit of the ruins, and it's really rugged rock. There's a street. In that first picture, I guess I could have pointed out the square area. The square area is where it was close to the city gate. And that's where the leader of the town, the mayor or whatever he would be called, he would sit there and people could bring their problems to him, and he would
judge.
He would judge, yeah, or solve problems of the people that came. And that was another entrance to the city of Dan, and this one, it was more of clay rocks. It's pretty vulnerable, and so they have it covered as they're excavating. It's covered with a roof.
Do you want me to tell them? This is at Caesarea Philippi, and what you see there is a spring, or there's water right in this pool area. Ooh. Did I fast forward? But you can go back to those.
You're going the wrong way.
Am I going?
No, you're.
I'm
yeah,
going
there
back.
you go.
There it is.
Okay. Yeah.
This is Caesarea Philippi, and it was really an evil place in that time. And you know, in the scripture, it just says maybe a sentence like the disciples went up to Caesarea Philippi, and it is quite a trek. It's just really, really rugged. And in this area, they have a number of places where they worshipped their idols that are in this cliff here. But where I showed you that pool of water, that's where they would sacrifice the babies, and they would throw them in to the pool, and if they came back out, the gods had rejected their sacrifice, but if they stayed in, then they were accepted. But it was where Jesus asked his disciples.
I'll read that. I'll read that part from Matthew 16. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." So when you see this place and you see all the niches in the rock,
Can I go back to that?
well, I think it's one more forward.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, you can see all these indentations in the rock where they had statues of their different gods, and you think of that, and then this scripture is so much more meaningful when Jesus asks, "Who do you say I am?" You know, they have all these other gods they're worshiping. I'm sorry that I'm making so much noise here.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Let's see.
You can go. This is the area where the Druze live, D-R-U-Z-E, and they're sort of a separatist group. They pretty much stay to themselves. If you're born a Druze, you are that for life, and you can't, it isn't a group you join or anything like that. You just are born into this.
And the hills around there, it's quite a few orchards there, and they say that the best apples in the world come from this area.
And cherries,
and
I guess,
cherries,
too.
yeah.
And they sell all their apples to the Syrians, and then the Syrians export them.
No, let me do.
This was the UN complex, and this is between Syria and Israel. So if you're going from one to the other, you would go through this UN complex, and there's sort of a no man's land.
This is Syria
in
right
that.
here, and this is the UN center, but and no man's land in between there. Lots of beautiful orchards between there, though.
There we are at, we stayed at a resort, En-Gev Resort on the Sea of Galilee. We were there for 3 nights. Just a beautiful area and just so peaceful. We can see why Jesus would have liked to spend time by the Sea of Galilee. It was just beautiful around there.
We stayed in a kibbutz. There's probably 140 different cabins within the
one
complex.
on the right was our
Let's
our
see, our
home for 3 nights.
This is our home right there, wasn't it, Betty? And we were there for 3
nights. Yep. Often when we were driving someplace in the bus, we would see these orchards or see different fields where they were covered with netting. And we thought it's probably to keep birds away. We don't really know, but they would have whole orchards covered with netting.
Acres and acres and acres, but it just seemed like the agriculture was so intense, and that they could grow anything there. It seemed like it was just beautiful.
Just a field.
Drip irrigation, throughout, and just really well managed.
We didn't know what a lot of the crops were, but we did see lots of fields. Everything was so green this time of year when we were there. When we were there in the summer, it was really brown, so it was quite a contrast. We went to the Church of the Annunciation in Nazareth, and this is where they say that the angel appeared to Mary to tell her that she would be the mother of Jesus. This was the well where she was at when the angel appeared to her. Again, they have motifs depicting that, and the little chapel was pretty ornate on the inside. That was the church from the outside. We walked a ways in Nazareth, and this little spice shop, it was just a hole in the wall, really, in an alley, but oh man, the smells were amazing in there. They had spices and different grains and all sorts of things that you could buy. It was great. We went to Nazareth Village. This was a village that they have set up as it would have been in the first century. And it was just really neat. The people were portraying life as it was back in the first century.
Yeah, this lady, boy, she was very talented. She was taking the wool, spinning it, and then she was actually making a blanket or had a loom there to weave it together. But it was, she really did a good job. This is one of the presses, the press for the olive, and there would be a donkey on this piece of wood out here, go around and smash the olives here, and then the next here they would make this press, and you can see the weights that they have on here. The first press that they would use would be the oil that would go to the temple, the virgin oil.
The extra virgin olive oil, and that would go to the temple.
They would make 3 for sure 3 presses, and each one, the quality would be less each time, but that's how they extracted it. And this lady, she knew how to cook or bake. My goodness, she had there was a pan that went over the hearth here. It was kind of circular, and she'd throw the dough on there, and she was making the bread here for us, and this is where we ate. I had our dinner there, but she was really quick.
So we had warm bread for lunch, and their bread is so good over there.
Oh.
Had lentil soup.
This is
and
Rachel
we had
here.
chicken. Yep, Rachel. That was Nazareth from our hotel room. It's a pretty good sized city right now. At the time of Jesus, they said it probably was only about 100 people or something like that. It's the Mount of the Transfiguration. This is the Church of the 10 Lepers in Jenin. Jenin is way up here. Pretty poor area right now, and a difficult area to live in, especially as a Christian.
It was an area where they had a checkpoint that was, I don't think very many tourists went through this, because when they came on the bus, the individual was armed that came in, and we looked at all of our passports, and then there was another man following him, and he had a radio, and he had his hand on the radio all the time. So it just was not a very secure area, and if that was the only time we probably felt a little bit uncomfortable, perhaps, but a difficult checkpoint there.
Yeah, so they say that the lepers lived in that cistern that you just went by, and that's okay. And then they were fed from above through this hole, and then the church is right, it connects with where the cistern was, and they said it's the 4th oldest church in the world. This was a Holocaust museum, very sobering to go through that. I have to go faster. The Israel Museum. This houses some of the parts of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So we would see little fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls here. This is a model of Jerusalem as it would have been in the time of Jesus.
Yeah, this is really helpful. It lays it out exactly how it was Jesus' time, so you really get a picture of what the temple was before the Romans leveled it, and how small the community was. Here's another picture of it. Gives you a perspective of how well they've done that.
When we were in the old city, we did a lot of walking. There's cars that drive on some of the streets, but otherwise we just walked from place to place in the old city. There were some ruins by the western wall.
And those rocks that you see down below, that's part of the temple as the Romans destroyed it. They pulled everything down, and they left a lot of the stonework just laying there, and this has been excavated since.
There was quite a bit of security to get into the Temple Mount area, and then when we were in there, it's a huge plaza area. This was a washing area for the Muslims before they would go into the mosque to worship. There's a mosque on one side, and then you go to another area where the I don't even know what it's called, I guess the Temple Mount, the Gold Dome that was just another washing area. And then the famous Golden Dome is over where they think Muhammad rose, and it's also over where Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac.
The stone is underneath the dome there.
And this is the area where the temple would have been too at one time.
So that foundation around Mount Moriah, that's what surrounds the whole Temple Mount. And it's a big plaza area, really. They say during Ramadan, which is the end of February, they have 400 to 500,000 people there. And in the stonework, you can see lines where people line up to pray so that they're facing Mecca, that you don't get disoriented at all. But it's a big area. And 4 years ago, Betty and I got in a little bit of trouble because I put my arm around her to take a picture. And the security, you're not supposed to be touching one another. And the women have to be very modestly dressed or covered. So it's an area that's... And a lot of conflict has come out of here because the Jews, are right next to it, and the Muslims, and so there's a lot of electricity in that area there.
That's just part of the plaza area. It's huge.
Yeah, all stone.
This is excavation on the south side, and as you're close to the building there are the southern steps, and they say that this is where Jesus actually preached, on the southern steps, and where he would have entered into the temple too, from the southern steps. As we went out of town, we could see sheep and goats grazing on the hillside, and the hillsides were actually green that time of year. And we went out into the wilderness, and we had an Ash Wednesday service out in the wilderness. And that was really meaningful. Let's see.
The pastor there is First Covenant from Omaha, and then Cindy's pastor there on the right, or on your left. But that was on Ash Wednesday.
Mm-hmm. And the wilderness, this was the area where Jesus was also tempted. Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan. This is when he had just been baptized, and he was led by the Spirit into the desert, where for 40 days he was tempted by the devil. He ate nothing during those days, and at the end of them he was hungry. But after our little service there, we went off for about 20 minutes by ourselves and just spent some time with the Lord. On our way to Masada, which is down here by the Dead Sea, we would see acres and acres of greenhouses out there. They grow lots of vegetables in Israel, and we're assuming that's probably what was growing in there. It was in this area, too, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found.
You can see the caves up
in
in there, just
in the hillside,
just all over along the side of the hill. Very rugged area. We're down. The Dead Sea is 1,400 feet below sea level. It's the lowest point in the world, and so even the Jordan, as it flows down, is below sea level almost all the time. Here's date trees, and again, they're out in the wilderness, and this beautiful orchard.
Some of the best dates in the world come from here, they said. There's a picture of the Dead Sea as we're driving by. You can see the mineral deposits on the shoreline.
We happened to see a boat when we were there, and our guide said that's the third one he's seen. And it was a commercial boat, but there's not a lot of tourists. It's the Dead Sea, and it's 6 times more dense than the ocean is. So it's not a nice place to swim in.
We went to Masada, and this is just an amazing place. Maybe you want to talk about that a little more.
Well, for me, it was one of the highlights. Masada. It was. It's like almost being in an airplane when you get up on the top. It was where Herod had built his last retreat. To if everything went apart, that's where he was going to be able to withstand any kind of attack. But it's almost at sea level, and the Dead Sea that is near it is 1,400 feet below sea level. So you're up a long ways, and then it's completely isolated by itself. And Herod had built a series of gullies almost, or little traps around the mountain that would allow the water to be collected. And he had cisterns. He had enough water. They said it was over 1 million gallons of water that he had captured in these cisterns. And they had spas, and they had, it was just a beautiful area. And then he had warehouses above, probably eight of them 40 feet by 20, something like that, for food stores. So it was a well-designed, beautiful place. But we, on the outside, they have a tram that goes up the mountain up there, and there's also a snake path that you can walk, but it's, I think on my Fitbit, it said 122 stories, and Matt and I walked up it, and it was
Just took the tram.
but it was a beautiful hike on the way up.
That was one of the cisterns where they stored water, and
Yeah. There's
That-
the mosaic are still in there, and the plaster is still there, and some of the
The
painting
paint,
on the cisterns is still there. It's
a
just
bath
all these
area.
years. And one of the stories of Masada was that when the Jews, a sect of them was, the Romans were, it was the fall of Jerusalem, and the sect retreated there as protection. So they went up to Mount Masada, and the Romans came after them. And there was 940 some Jews that were in Masada. The Romans were 10 miles away from their water supply, and they built a ramp up to this, which is probably at least 1,000 feet.
This is part of the ramp here. Yeah.
It's still visible, but they eventually took over the compound, and the Jews decided to take their own lives rather than let the being captured. So each family member had to kill their own family, and then the leaders killed one another. There was 10 left, and they each took their own lives, and then the last person, or took the other person's life, and the last one fell on his sword. And they said there were three of them that they found in the storeroom that didn't take their life, little kids, and I think 2 women. But that's how the story was, how they ended. So the Romans opened up the door after building this incredible ramp, and they're all dead.
It was by the Dead Sea. Some from our group
There's an old man out
chose
there
to
floating in the water.
float.
There was a group that was near us, and if you float like this, you can stand up straight in the water, so it's about up to you're not touching the ground, but you're about up to your shoulder. And they were doing a synchronized swimming routine out there. It was really pretty cute, but it's a strange feeling.
That was Jaffa Gate. That was the gate that we went into, usually into the old city. And it's built at a right angle so that if somebody was attacking, they couldn't just ram through the gate. It is at a right angle to get in there. But that was close to our hotel where we stayed.
Yeah, the old city is less than a square mile in area, but it's one of the most dense populated areas in the world.
This was Palm Sunday Road where Jesus would have ridden the donkey down towards Jerusalem. It was quite steep. And then we are with Claris there with Jerusalem in the background. We're on the Mount of Olives there. And this was our group.
They're really great people.
Yeah. On the Mount of Olives, lots of olive trees, of course. There was a Jewish cemetery on the hillside there too, and the stones on the top of the tombs, they said when people come to visit, they bring stones and place on the tombs rather than bringing flowers. Some of the olive trees in Garden of Gethsemane. And some of them are really old, hundreds of years old. When an olive tree is cut, new one will come from the roots.
That's probably the oldest one right here. They said around 800 years, they thought.
That's the eastern gate of the old city, and that's where they believe Jesus will return, or where they believe the Messiah will come, I guess.
And the Muslims, they have already blocked that gate up and built a Muslim cemetery right in front of the gates to discourage that from happening.
Yeah. This was as if that would make a difference.
Make any difference, yeah.
This is the Church of the Nations that was by the Garden of Gethsemane. And again, they had beautiful motifs in there. Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, and then Judas betraying. The old city wall as we're driving. And just some street scenes, people on the street.
Now the Christians over there, there's less than 1% in the Holy Land. I don't know if it's a persecution as much as that they've more of them are educated, and they seem like they've left the area. You know, there's just very few Christians in Jerusalem area.
There's two areas where people think that Jesus may have died and where his tomb was. We went to the garden tomb, and it was just this beautiful garden, and it's next to a hillside that some think was Golgotha. This is a picture of the way it used to be. And you could, in the picture, you can see sort of the skull. And, but some of that has eroded. And so this is what it looks like now. But they said that could be the area of Golgotha where Jesus was crucified. And then the tomb area is here. And this was a tomb that was hewn out of the rock, and so they say that would have been a rich man's tomb that would have been more like the kind that Jesus would have been buried in, and this is where the body was laid.
Yeah, where they excavated it, there is the track. Let's see, the track is right up here for the stone. But when they excavated, they said the stone wasn't there, but they had one there, but it wasn't the original there that was there. But it really gave you quite a feeling to walk into the tomb and to think that this might be the one where...
And we had a communion service there in the garden. It was a beautiful garden. It was a very meaningful communion service. I'm not moving. I don't know why this is making so much noise.
Maybe just shut it off, Betty.
The last picture was the upper room where Jesus would have met, had the Last Supper with his disciples.
Why don't you shut it off and just use this?
Okay, thank you. Whoops.
It's distracting.
This is a depiction of Jesus and his disciples going out to the Garden of Gethsemane after the Last Supper. And the road, they said this is a first century road, and it could have even been the road that Jesus would have taken to go out to the Mount of Olives, out to the Garden of Gethsemane. Depiction of him being arrested and taken to Caiaphas's house. This is Caiaphas's house.
Yeah, this was another amazing place here. And this is a cistern that Caiaphas used to as a prison. And there's a chance that, you know, when Christ was arrested on Thursday night before he went before his trial, that he would have been held here. And as we looked up in the top up here where they draw water out of the cistern, there were crosses that were embedded into the stone there. But we got all 44 of us in there. There's some on the stairway, I think, but everybody got into the cistern.
Yeah. This just portrays Jesus, or Peter's denial of Christ in the courtyard just outside of Caiaphas's house. Then the last day we went on the Via Dolorosa, the way of the cross, that Jesus would have walked going out to Golgotha. And there's I think 14 stations along the way. The last, at least 4 of them are in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, but there's stations along the way, and each one means something. This is where Jesus fell, and someone gave him a drink of water. There you see the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the dome in the background. This is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and this is where a lot believe that Jesus died and was buried. And there's 6 churches here that each have their area. And there's one, it's hard to see on here, but there's one area where you can go into, and they say that this is over the tomb site. And there again, you're just allowed in there for a few seconds, and then you go out to another area. But there's chapels throughout, lots of paintings, lots of ornate altars, and different areas for worship throughout. There was a cave area in the basement, and they said that could have been used as a tomb. The bedrock of Golgotha. a crack in the rock that could have been caused by the earthquake when Jesus died. Yeah, lots of chapel here. Under the altar here, there was a little hole, and you could reach down and touch rock, and they say that was Golgotha. Again, it's hard to imagine when it's, everything is built up over it, but that's why I appreciated the garden tomb and the rock out.
Yeah.
You can imagine a little bit more, but lots of paintings depicting Jesus' death and burial. This was our guide, Saeed, and he was amazing. He is so knowledgeable about the area and the people and the history, and just was talking all the time, telling us.
He was a resident of Israel, or of Jerusalem, and his passport was Jordanian. He was a Lutheran, and his wife is a Catholic. But there, once you're born into the Lutheran or the Catholic, you would stay in that, whatever your family was. You would never leave that. And so that was his background. But he was so knowledgeable, just an encyclopedia.
The last day we were able to walk the ramparts. This is the old city wall, and we were able to walk a couple sections of that.
This would be how thick the walls are, and then every once in a while there would be an opening, and in order to get a gun or a bow and arrow or something out, to defend the city. Excuse me. Again, uneven steps.
Yeah. That was how we climbed up to get up to the wall. Just some views of the city from up on the wall.
It's the southern
Looking
steps again.
towards the southern steps again, yeah. We weren't able to get close to them this time. Last time we had gone there. And then I just have a number of street scenes. You can go through those pretty quickly. Markets, in the old city, there's markets all over the place, and lots of people want to sell you souvenirs.
This particular one here, where the big stones were, that was the original Roman market road. They didn't have more than maybe 100 yards, if it was that long, of this original road section.
Some Jewish men going to their Sabbath meal. There's some more streets.
Everything is stone. Stone buildings, the stone streets.
This one is a little bit out of place, but this was Pastor Matt in the valley of Elah, and this is where David defeated Goliath.
It's a very strategic area that whoever controlled that particular area controlled the traffic north and south there.
Just some sunsets on the Sea of Galilee. Again, just a beautiful area there. We had a Sunday morning worship service by the Sea of Galilee too, and that was great.
We had a Palestinian Christian that spoke to us, and he was wonderful. He'd written a number of books, but some of those Palestinians go through, and that was really our perspective. We were introduced to the Palestinians' plight. Like if they live in Gaza, it's supposed to be one of the worst places in the world to live. And once you go into Gaza, you don't come out again. If it's Palestinian, you're there for the rest of your life. But this was near our hotel, and I had to take this picture because this guy's, he's moved his mirror in, and it's
So he could get
I don't know if
close
it's
to
a
the
half
wall.
an inch next to the building. He couldn't see because he has no mirror, and there wasn't a scratch on that car. I don't know how he did that. But that's, space is such a premium. And this was, we had buffets morning and evening at most of our hotels.
At all the hotels
Food
we
was really
stayed
good.
at,
We didn't know what we were eating all the time, but you had plenty to eat. And then I think for our ticket, we only paid for, I think, one meal, and that was at Masada. But otherwise all the
everything was
meals were
included.
provided for us, and they're all really good.
Good.
And the accommodations were excellent. This is the hotel that was
Knights Palace,
Hotel.
just some scenes from
That was
there.
built in 1500, and yet beautiful hotel.
But it just was a wonderful experience, and I hope that some of you will think about going. They're going to be going in 2 years again. Matt and